Okay, here it is, February 14th, 2025. It's a snowy day out there in Ottawa, and thought it'd be a good day to take a look at Pontiac's War by John Poniske. John, I hope I'm saying your name right, and published by Compass Games. Now, I've only had the game for, I got the day before yesterday. So I punched out the counters, read the rules at least once, going through the sequence of play and John's illustrated example of play. So I'm certainly no expert on the game. So I'm going to follow my usual procedure to describe the game, tell you a little bit about it. But for this game, I've done something a little bit different. It's not a script or anything, but I put down 10 points about this game that I in particular like, and I'll be getting to those in a moment. Now, in Canada, I was first introduced to colonial North American warfare in, I think, grade 5, Miss Saracen's history class. She was always good for reenacting and acting out the characters. But the real influence for a 10, 12-year-old were comic books. And I used to collect some of the classics illustrated. One of my favorites was Last of the Mohicans, James Fenimore Cooper. Deerslayer, also James Fenimore Cooper. And one of my absolute favorites was The Conspiracy of Pontiac by Francis Parkman. Of course, reading this much later in life, the complete work. It's a classic work on the Pontiac Rebellion and highly recommended. But let's get to John's game. We're taking a look now at the very colorful map, and it is very well done indeed. The counters are 3/4 inch, very colorful, and we'll zoom in on them pretty soon. You get 2 decks of cards. I think there's 55 in each. You've got a deck for the British, and you've also got a deck for the First Nations people, or Indians, if you want to call them as they did in the time. I'm going to do something, like I said, I'm going to mention 10 things in this game that I particularly like, but I'll get to those in a second. You've got your turn track up there on the right. You've got a British reinforcement space right here, and you've got the Bank of England, I'll get to that later too, and an off-board track to go to Philadelphia. Victory points down here at the bottom. Very colorful map by Compass. I think the artist is Newt Gunitz, whom I really like as an artist. He's done great work on games that I play. He did the counters to my War for America, and he did a very good job on these. What I found particularly interesting about John's map is how it bears a striking resemblance to mine in some ways. Now, this is just a homemade prototype for my game on the 7 Years' War. And of course, Pontiac's Rebellion is a direct result of this war. So this is a project I'm working on now. But what I found interesting was, of course, the geography and the points we picked out. John put the forts embossed right on the map, which I did also, and of course the location of the Indian villages. So I thought that was just kind of interesting. Now I will zoom in closer in a moment, but I'll point out some of the Indian tribes represented. Here you've got the Seneca tribe, and over here you've got the purple is the Mingo, this light yellow is the Lenape, black is Shawnee, more Mingos here, the Miamis, the Ottawa, Seneca, Ojibwa, more Ottawa up there, more Ojibwa. Way over to the west, here's the Menominee, and you've got the Potawatomi, the Wea, Kickapoos, and Piankshaws. They're well represented. You've got the colonial frontier, these diamond-shaped squares, and of course the location of major forts, each with a defense number. The Great Lakes are in there, and they're important because of the lake schooners that existed, and they plied the waters of Lake Erie and also into Lake Michigan. But no, I don't think the naval units got into Lake Michigan. No, pardon me. It was Lake Erie they mainly stayed on. So I'm still learning this game, but from what I see, I really like it. Now let's get back to those 10 points that I think make this game a truly great recreation of the Frontier Rebellion. Okay, number one in the things I like about this game is he's got this Bank of England box, and he's done a beautiful job here of getting the economy. War is not free. Now, other games have had money and stuff involved in raising your troops, things like that. Armada comes to mind, but I remember that game being kind of clunky. You had ducats to deal with, and you had to victual your ship and create your ships, and you needed a calculator to do all the math. It was a mathematical game. You needed a pencil, paper, and a pad. I hated that. This is so simple, but elegant. For example, if you wanted to build a supply unit, Royal Americans, everything pretty well costs about 1 guinea. So you just want to build these units, you pay for them. So all you do is take these 5 guinea token, put it on the Bank of England. Because it's money you don't really have. It's almost like a MasterCard of the period. Sure, make as big an army as you want, but you're going to pay for it. And how do you pay for it? Well, at the end of the game, the amount of money you spent raising that army is going to be subtracted from your victory points. So you've got to be careful with what you spend. I think it's a simple rule, but really, really elegant, and I like it. Okay, the second thing I liked about this game was the way ambushes work. Now here we can show off the elegance of the counters too. Here we've got some Royal Americans, a 1 and 2 regulars. And let's say these guys wanted to enter the Seneca village. Well, the Senecas can ambush this column, and as long as they are 50% of the value of the attacking column, which in this case they are. So the Senecas are allowed to ambush the Royal Americans and the regulars before they get into the hex. And the practical way ambushes work are die roll modifiers. So the ambushes are simple but elegant, something I really like. Now, the third thing I like about this game is the variety of card events. You get a British deck, as I mentioned, and a Frontier deck, or rather the Indian deck. And I'll just show you some sample ones from the British deck. The cards, there's no wasted cards. When you have an event that isn't really applicable at the time, there's a mulligan rule that you can use the card for another purpose, for a die roll modifier. But the card indicates who can use it and where it can be used. In this case, let's say an Indian village. And this text describes what the card does, and if you're interested in the history, this describes the history behind the card. So nothing's for certain. George Croghan, he was a well-known character at that time. Highland Ferocity, because we've got the Black Watch in this game. Ammunition low, subtract 1 arms point from the Indian arms track. That's one of the features I liked, which I'll get to. So I'm just showing you a couple of examples. Spy, Cold Feet. There's just a lot of individual different cards, and that's a very good feature about the game. And the native cards have the same kind of thing. Lots of variety to them. Not too wordy. Graphics are good. Burning Shamokin. War Council. Les Robes Noires, the Black Robes. Coureurs de Bois, Runners of the Woods. Les Mépris Anglais, English Contempt. Les Traites, Traitors, and Temporary Truce, and so on. Now, I didn't count them, but I think there's 55 cards. So you've got a deck of 110 cards total, which gives you a lot of variety for the game. great feature. It's a card-assisted game, not a card-driven game. Well, number 4 is what I already mentioned, the mulligan rule for cards that you can't use. If you have a card that you just can't use, you can discard it and use it as a mulligan card to get a combat advantage. That's something I like. Now, what else do I like? Well, leadership. You get the historical leaders, and this I really like. There are only a few of the leaders, but you'll get the idea. You certainly have, of course, you've got Pontiac. You've got these amazing characters like Sir William Johnson. Who hasn't read colonial history that hasn't heard of Sir William Johnson? Minor characters like Major Wilkins at Fort Niagara, and of course the famous Robert Rogers, who was famous in the 7 Years' War, and he takes part in this one too. And you got a whole host of Indian chiefs too that I'm afraid I'm not familiar with because I haven't read Parkman in a long time. Neolin is from the Lenape tribe, and you get Shingas from the Lenape tribe. And you get a lot of other Indian leaders too, like Lelu from the Kickapoo and Gorelo from the Pianksha. So leadership is another feature of this game, which I really like. Okay, 6th feature of the game I like very much is the fact that the historic forts are imprinted right on the game. So I know a lot of these forts. I've visited some of them. Fort Presqu'île, Fort Le Boeuf, Fort Venango, Fort Pitt, present-day site of Pittsburgh, of course, Fort Ligonier, Fort Cumberland, Fort Bedford, Fort Augusta, and Fort Allen. I guess that's where Allentown, Pennsylvania is today, and many, many others. You get a whole host of forts. And one of the major objectives of Pontiac's rebellion is to burn and destroy these forts. That's one of the major victory conditions. That's the essence of this rebellion. Pontiac's rebellion is to wipe out the white man, certainly the English, from what he perceived as all Indian territory. And as the British colonial player, you're trying to prevent it. Another cool rule I really like is these Tweedledee war belt chits. Now, these can be placed on Indian villages, and when they are, that Indian village will tend to join the Pontiac's Confederacy, and these can be distributed and moved around the map. So I like these. Now, at the opposite side of the fence, I don't have a counter here to show you, but is the treaty rules. So if an Indian village gets overrun by the English, he's forced to sign a treaty, and he's more or less knocked out of the war. So the war belts and the treaty rules are another very keen feature. Another thing I like is the naval rules. Now there's only a few schooners in the game. Here's the Michigan and Huron, and they plied the waters of Lake Erie. More or less, you can transport units using these schooners on the lakes. Now, let's face it, they're individual schooners. But if you read any accounts, certainly if you read Parkman, you see how important even a single schooner can mean on Lake Erie. Of course, Pontiac and his Confederacy had no way of stopping schooners, so that's why they're so important. It's only a counter or so, but their importance is all out of proportion to their size. So John has got that in the game. And I really like that. Decent respect for the naval history. Another thing I really like is this arms track. It's a simple idea, but it's a great idea. You have to remember that the Indians in the Pontiac's War didn't have a supply system like the white man did. If an Indian had a gun, he got it from a white man. And if an Indian tribe got ammunition, he got it from a white man. So the Indians are in the embarrassing position. In order to make war, they actually have to get their armaments from the English. Well, you might say, well, they've already got their arms, haven't they? Well, yeah, but having the arms and having them serviced is something else. Okay, one of your muskets is broken. how do you fix it? So you need blacksmiths, things like that. And this arms track takes that into account. As the Indians engage in battles, their overall arms counter goes down. Of course, when you get down to 1 or nothing, you're kind of in trouble. Now, the only reason it goes up is if capturing and wiping out forts, your arms go back up because you've captured supplies. Again, that's the beauty of this game. It's simple but elegant. I'd like to say something about the rulebook, which I like very much. It was just a delight to read. It's on this shiny gloss paper. There are lots of illustrations. It's 36 pages long, but the actual rules are only about 16 pages. I had no difficulty with this game at all. Sequence of play, lots of illustrations. Now, I've yet to play it with an opponent. I've only been fooling around with it solitaire here. He's also got this great bibliography. There the rules end at about page 16, 17. Introductory scenarios. There are several scenarios, by the way. You don't have to play the whole campaign if you don't want to. And there's some great designer notes. I always love reading the designer notes. And then on page, 25, there's a very detailed first turn playthrough. I actually did this before reading the rules. I did the playthrough and then read the rules. I thought for me, everybody learns differently. Doing the playthrough and then reading the rules was best for me. Somebody else might be different, but I don't think you'll have any difficulty with the rule book. Now, Pontiac's War could very well be my favorite colonial game taking place in North America. Of course, it's the new kid on the block. It's brand new, and I'm quite impressed with it. For a long time, my favorite colonial game was this old one from the Aulic Council called Mohawk. Long out of print and considered pretty rare. But it was Mohawk that sort of stimulated me to work on my own game, Battle for a Continent. And I'm really struck on how similar Battle for a Continent and Pontiac's War are. But this video is supposed to be about John's game, and this game is really boss. I really like it. I'm hoping that if and when Battle for a Continent ever does come out, it's a good companion game to Pontiac's War, because you have the 7 Years' War and, of course, Pontiac's Rebellion. So that's all I've got to say about Pontiac's War. If you're thinking about getting it, I don't think you'll be sorry if you purchased it. So thank you for watching.